In this video, we're going to show you how you can improve the existing code for the lab exercise on the computation of text to see how you can somehow the program I'm going to show you is actually correct. However, it hasn't really followed the perfect style for coding. So that's why while maintaining the correct production of outputs, I would like to see how we can change the internal structure of the code in such a way that it is actually more maintainable. Let's just briefly review what the problem we are trying to solve. So remember, for this lab exercise here, we're going to get the filing status from the user, and we're going to get their taxable income. So these are the two input values we're going to get from the users from the console. Once we get those two pieces of information, we're going to calculate the income tax based on either the single filing status or the married filing status, either one. And then for each one of them, depending on how high the user's income is, we're going to calculate going to split their income into up to 3 parts. And for the first, for example, let's say for the case of the single filing status, for the first $8,350, we're going to charge 10% tax for the user. Of course, if their income is actually strictly below this first cutoff point, then of course all their income will be charged 10% for the tax. And similarly, let's say if the user's income actually exceeds the first cutoff point, then that means they will still pay for the first $8,350. They have to pay for 10% for the tax, but for the remaining amount after this first cutoff point, they have to be charged with a higher rate. So that's why we said we can split the user's income to up to 3 parts, and each part will be taxed accordingly. And we're going to tax differently for both mechanisms. So that's an overview of the problem, and we do have some example for you, and you should really go over them. And our task is to actually do the Java program to actually take the user to inputs and then to calculate their income tax. For example, let's say in this case, your program should really prompt the user to enter their name. And once they enter their name, later on for all the prompt messages, you're going to ask that particular user to enter their filing status. In this case, let's say it's status 1, which means the user Jim is actually a single filing user. And then after they specify their status, we're going to ask them to enter their taxable income. In this case, let's say it is this number here, and because this number here actually exceeds the cutoff point, the second cutoff point for the single filing status. In this case, we're actually going to split the user's income into 3 parts. And as you can see that now, once the user enters the income, this is the output. So first of all, we're going to say, Jim, you should pay this amount of tax. And then we should say which calculation, what the calculation is based on which scheme, either single filing or the married filing. We're going to say that as well as the output. And then we're going to break down the calculation into 3 parts, in this case, just to inform the user how the tax has been calculated. Okay, so that's sort of the input-output behavior for your program. And I'm going to show you one possible solution which is correct, but it doesn't really follow the ideal style for Java programming in such a way that we have too much code repetition. In some sense, we'd say the code smells, which means it is not so easy to maintain the code due to repetition. So the goal of this video is really to show you how you can improve your code structure while maintaining the production of correct outputs. That's the goal. Okay, so let's go to Eclipse, and I have my projects already. So that will be CSE114 Week 2 Labs. And the one we want to look at is a class called Compute Text. And if you go there, let's have a quick look. If you double click on the tab on Eclipse, it's going to maximize the view. If you double click it again, it's going to go back to the original view with the Package Explorer. So let's maximize the view. So now, first of all, we import the scanner from Java utility because we want to read from the user. So let's just go quickly. The code is not too long, so let's go very quickly. what this code is trying to do. So first of all, we actually tell the user to enter your name, and then after they enter their name, we're actually going to after we prompt the user for their name, so this is like an output message to console. And after we print this message to console, we have to make sure we enable the user to actually enter something to the console using the keyboard. So this is also a critical line. So usually when we say prompt the user for something, that really consists of two parts. So first part is like a line number 7. First of all, we have to print the prompt message to the console. And the second part is we have to enable the user to actually enter something to the console. So somehow we want to make the console editable. That's really the second part. Okay, so we actually declare the scanner, and then so this is the second part. We try to read the next line from the user, being their name. So from then onwards, if you put your mouse over this name here, you can see Eclipse also highlights the name you're referring to. So you can see this name here is really used over here to say, for example, Jim or Peter. Let's say Peter, enter your filing status. So we are creating more personalized message. Okay, so once the user is allowed to enter an integer as the input, then we're going to do some checks. So currently the code is doing this following check. So the code is to say, well, if the status is larger than 2, then we're going to print an error message because the status can either be 1 or 2. So if that's greater than 2, that means starting from 3, 4, 5, etc. So that should be an error. Similarly, if the file status is less than 1, then we're going to do this. Okay, we're going to actually print out the illegal status. Okay, so now we're actually going to see, and then after that, we actually have another statement here. We say else if the status. So you can see now we actually have a single if statement here, and that if statement contains one else if, second else if, and also third else if. So we got 3 else if statements for that if statement basically. Okay, so now here we'd say that else if status equals 1, then we're going to do this calculation for the single filing user. And then for the last else if statement here, we'd say, well, if status equals 2, then we're going to calculate according to the Mary's filing scheme. Okay, that's sort of the if statement structure. So now let's say for the single filing system, we're going to say, okay, so now please enter your taxable income. And then we're going to, the second part is to enable the user to enter their income to the console. So now you can see line 24 and 25 have to be repeated. Also for the case where status equals 2. Let's see. So 24 and 25. And now if we look at 54 and 55, so those are the first 2 lines for the case where status equals 2. So this is the first repetition we have. So somehow we should be able to factor these 2 out and put it in a single place. That's really an important thing to do. Okay, that's first repetition we have. And then let's see. Under the single filing scheme, we actually have different statement here. We'd say, well, if it is the case that the income is actually less than or equal to the first cutoff point, that means we're only going to calculate the text based on the income times 10%. And then we're going to print out all these messages to say, well, you should pay how much, and calculation is based on single filing scheme. And also, we're going to say part 1, because it's only one part. It's not only going to split into one part rather than 2 or 3 parts. And similarly, you can see this code here is when your income exceeds the first cutoff point, but still below the second cutoff point. In this case, we'll split the income into 2 parts. That's why you see that we have part 1 and part 2. And also, we'll calculate the text by adding part 1 and part 2 all together. However, you can see that, so first of all, you can see that the calculation here, we're calculating part 1 and part 2, but now somehow the calculation for the text is somehow, there's some duplication here because it could have just said, well, text is simply going to be equal to all the parts added up together, and some parts might be 0. If your income is not high enough, of course, some part will be 0. So that's something we can improve as well. And more obviously, you can see that this part here is certainly a duplication from the previous one, you see? So here, for example, this line here, you have, for example, Jim, you should pay this amount of text. And you also have to repeat that in the previous branch. And also for the next branch, you also have to repeat that. So you have actually quite many repetition. And you will see that in later, the other branch where we talk about status 2, you got exactly the same repetition here. Exactly the same repetition here. And again, this repetition here. That means for a single line of print statements, we actually repeat it 6 times. It should be possible just put it in a single place just one time. Okay, I'm going to show you when I do the improvement. And also, this statement here is also somehow repeated because you say calculation is based on the scheme of single filing. And this one is saying exactly the same thing. And however, this one, although it's printing to say, well, it's based on a different scheme, but we should be able to do a little bit better to say we don't have to repeat it. We can somehow just maybe use some decision making to actually say, well, in this case, we'll do memory filing. In the other case, we'll do single filing in just one single place. I'll show you as well. Okay, so here we have, now we have system out of print line, so part 1 and part 2. So here we have part 1, part 2 again, so it's a duplication here, you see? So we gotta say print part 1, print part 2, and here we have to say, for example, let's say in the other branch where the status equals 2, so here you see, for all of them we have to say print part 1. So that's certainly a duplication there, right? So all of them we have to say print part 1. And for the second and third parts, we have to say print part 2, repeat it twice. And also, we have to say print part 3. So again, you can see how much repetition we have. We can greatly simplify the code by eliminating all the duplicates. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so that's sort of like a quick go over of the code structure. I'll make this code available for you to study. So this will be sort of like some style which you would like to avoid. So I'm going to show you another one that will greatly simplify the code. Okay, let me just go back to Eclipse. And I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to copy this code here just to keep that intact. And I'm going to right click on the package here and then I'll create a new class. So I'll just say compute text 2. So this compute text 2 would be the improved version. And we're going to also to put a main method by default. Doesn't matter, we're going to copy and paste code anyway. So finish. So now I'm going to paste the code. Of course, I have to change the name from compute text 2 to compute text to compute text 2. Okay, so this is the code I'm going to change by eliminating all the duplicates I just mentioned. Okay, first of all, I would like to change improve the indentation of this class a little bit. So you can see that the first, so here we start the declaration of the class compute text 2, and now this main method here should somehow belong to the class, so they should not be indented at the same level. So that means here you see there's no difference between the two indentations, but they should be. So now I would like to somehow to shift everything under and including the main method somehow to the right by one tap. So the way to do that is simply by highlighting the main method. So I think that will be the end of the main method here, and then I want to do a tap. Okay, just type tap, and then you actually shift the whole highlighted area to one position. Okay, so now you actually got a much better indentation. Okay, you can do the practice yourself. I'll make the original file available for you to download and try. Okay, so basically we are happy with this, but I would suggest here we can actually declare the scanner maybe in the first line. Okay, that means we're going to use that for all the prompt messages. So we're going to group the relevant lines together. So this one is to say this part, these two lines are going to prompt the user for their name. So line number 9 is going to print an output message to the console to inform the user, now you should really enter your name. And line number 10 is to enable the user to be able to type some words into the console. Okay, without this line here, the user will not be able to type anything on the console. You can try that out. If you eliminate this line, then you wouldn't be able to type anything on the console. Okay, you can try that out. Okay, I would like to group these two lines as well. So after they enter their name, we're going to say, for example, Jin, enter your filing status, and then this line here, again, enables the user to enter the integer for the filing status. Okay, so now we're going to do the following. So now we're going to see from line 15 onwards, we have the if, else if, and else if statement. We're going to make some improvement here. Okay, so first of all, we have to see something here. So somehow first of all, we agree that the code structure for the case where status equals 1 and for the case where status equals 2, the code structure look very, very similar, because they're really what really they are trying to do is to somehow figure out if the income, where the income will fall into, either below the first cutoff point, in between the first and second cutoff points, or above the second cutoff point. So both statuses will trigger the same code structure basically. However, somehow you can see now this first check is in this name scope. So you can see that's under the else if statement. So everything that we declare inside this area cannot be reused in the other else if statements. So again, to make it more visual, so this is actually the namespace for status equals 1. Okay, and this is the namespace for the status equals 2. And they are not really sharing any variable. Okay, but we would like them to share. So the way to do that is somehow to change, rather than saying else if and else if here, we're going to use the else statement. Okay, let me show you how. So first of all, we'd say if the status, let me just remove this empty line here. We don't really need that. Okay, we say that if status is larger than 2, then we're going to do something. Let's say if status larger than 2 is not the case, which means, let me give you some notes here, some comments here. That means status less than or equal to 2. So less than or equal to 2 is the negation of larger than 2. So please make sure you understand this. So that means if we can reach this point, so if we can reach this point to check the else if, that means the previous branching condition actually failed. That's why we are going to check the second one. Okay, that's why I put it here. So now we're going to check to see if status is less than 1. If it is the case, of course, we'll print out the illegal status message. If it is not, if we are going to check the this condition here, that means the status is actually larger than or equal to 1, right? Larger than or equal to 1 is actually the negation of less than 1. So you can see now, if we somehow bypass this this branch here, if we bypass this branch here, that means the status is less than or equal to 2. And if we again also bypass this else if branch here, that means status is larger than or equal to 1. If you combine these two together, you see status is less than or equal to 2 and also greater than or equal to 1. That means status can be either 1 or 2, right? So now I will simply just put the else part rather than 2 else if as before. So the advantage of that is under this else part, first of all, I'm pretty sure status is equal to 1 or status equals 2. That's something I'm pretty sure about because of the two Boolean conditions here. If you think about that, if something that's in between 1 and 2, and that's an integer, so of course it can either be 1 or it can be 2. The reason that I'm using the else statement here is because I can actually now do the following. So I'll take the I'll cut this else if these two else if parts. Let me cut them. And I'm going to paste them here. So now I'm going to put them under here. So what I have achieved is to say now, if status is larger than 2, do something. If else if status equals less than 1, we do something else. Else, so this is the case where we know status is either 1 or 2. only two possibilities. There's no third possibility. In this case, under the else branch, first of all, we're going to check to see if status equals 1. Okay, and now we don't need this else if anymore. We can simply just say else, simply because we know from the beginning of this else that the status can be either 1 or 2. So now we're first going to check if the first possibility is the case. If it is not the case, then it must be the second possibility. So that means status is equal to 2. Okay, so now that we actually, you can see now the if branch here over here and the else branch over here, both of them actually are under this else branch here. That means if anything that we declare over here, starting from here, will be common to the if and else if branches. So we can actually declare something here such that they can be shared and reused without being duplicated in this if branch here and also in this else branch here. Okay, that's really the motivation for having an else that will enclose the if and else branches for status equals 1 or status equal 2. Okay, first of all, the first duplicate we can get rid of is to say we can simply just put this code once to only prompt the user for their income. So we'd say, first of all, for both status being equal to 1 or status being equal to 2, first of all, we're going to print some message to the console, and also we're going to enable the user to enter some input, right? So this is already factored out, so we can get rid of that also for the case of status equal to. So you can see now, rather than having the same print statements and next in statements in both branches, we factor them out to somewhere where they are under, okay, which is this else branch here. Okay, I hope the first improvement is clear. Okay, it's one thing. And also, the second improvement I would like to make is to say now, we don't actually have to redeclare the text variable every time in all the if, else, if, and else branch. You see, we declare text actually basically 6 times. We don't actually have to do that. We can just declare that once only. That's one thing. And also for part 1, for part 2, and for part 3, they also have been redeclared many times, which we wouldn't like either. Okay, first of all, let me show you. I would like to first declare the double text. Let's say initially it's simply 0. It's always good practice to put some initial value. But now you have to know why we actually have some compile time error. So here, double text equals 0 will make this line here, double text equals income times 0.1. So we'll make this line uncompilable. Why? If you scroll your mouse over this arrow here in Eclipse, it says that duplicate local variable text. That is to say you already have some variable here called text. So you can never redeclare the same variable with maybe with a possibly different type. That way we also cover that in the lecture. So the way to do that is to say, well, this text here is really the text I declare over here. And I'm just trying to reassign its value to be this new value here. Okay, that's one thing we should do. And also similarly, we're going to get rid of this redecoration here and get rid of that. And we're going to, again, similarly get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of that. Okay, so now you can see that rather than declaring the same variable called text 6 times, we only declare that once, only once. Okay, so now I would like to handle the calculation for part 1, part 2, and part 3. So over here you can see that part 1, part 2, and part 3. So over here we actually have, so you can see now in this middle part where the income will be split into part 1 and part 2. So here we have part 1 and part 2. On the other hand, so in the case where it will be split into 3 parts, so here we also declare part 1 and part 2. Again, it's the redecoration issue. So we wouldn't like to duplicate the decorations. So I would like to do the following. I'll simply do double part 1. Let's say initially that's 0. Double part 2 is equal to 0. And double part 3 is equal to 0. So these three variables will be shared by both the cases where status is equal to 1 and all the branches under that, and also status equals 2 and all the branches under that. Okay, so first of all, we have to get rid of the double here because we cannot do any redecoration here. Okay, get rid of that, and get rid of that, get rid of that, and again, get rid of that, get rid of that. So we actually are removing many duplicate decoration. Okay, so do that. Okay, so now the next improvement I would like to make is to say, now somehow this print statement here is duplicated as I said before. So I don't want that actually. So I would like to somehow to move this to somewhere that's common to both branches. So that will be under the context of this else statement here. So how do I do that? Let me try to do that first. So I would like to move this away, just cut it. I'm going to remove others as well after I have done this first. So now we cannot do it under the else branch here because that belongs to the status equals 2 branch. So we're going to, let's see, so that's the one. We're going to do it here. Okay, so this is exactly directly under this else branch here. So we're going to say that is going to be the common action that we will perform after we have done the calculation for status equals 1 or after we have done this calculation for status equals 2. Okay, so we're going to put it here. That's something we're going to do. So actually we're going to say, so for example, Jim, you should pay. So we have, again, we can remove lots of duplicates. So Jim, you should pay, for example, some tax amount. So calculation is based on the scheme of, because we actually just cut the code from the context of single filing system. So here we're going to change this a little bit because this is the common area for both single filing and married filing. So we got to change this a little bit to actually do some discrimination. So now we're going to say, so now because we want to put this message in a single line, so I'm going to change this to print rather than print line. So calculation is based on the scheme of, okay, now I'm going to say if here status equals 1, so that'll be single filing, right? So we'll say system.out.print line. And then here I would say single filing. And then otherwise, I don't have to say else if here because we already know it's either 1 or 2. So if it is not 1, then it's got to be 2. Okay, I'm going to just save my typing here. I can say copy and paste. So now this should be married filing. Okay, so now, so you can see this part here is completely general. So this will work for, so that's why this code here can be shared by both branches. So we can actually remove lots of duplicates later, okay, based on what the status is. Okay, so now for part 1, part 2, and part 3, because somehow we initialize, you can see we initialize all the variables, part 1, part 2, and part 3 to be 0, hoping that we are actually going to reassign those parts, some parts, to be some positive amount if necessary. Okay, for example, in this case, we should really reassign part 1 only. In this case, we should reassign part 1 and part 2 only. And in this case, we're going to reassign all the parts. And similarly for the case where status equals 2. Okay, so now here we're going to do the following. So we're going to say now, if part 1 is greater than 0, that means it has been somehow reassigned. That's why there's some tax amount the user has to pay for part 1. If this is the case, then we're going to print out part 1. Okay, and so this will be part 1, and that should be capitalized. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other parts. So part 2 here, and this will be part 2 here, part 2 here, and now I have part 3, and part 3, and part 3. So now, here comes a critical exercise for you to do. Please try to think about yourself to see why this code over here will actually work for both the single file status and for the marriage filing status, and also for all the possible 3 branches you might have. That like for different amount of income, this will work for all of them. The reason, briefly, is because if somehow we would think if the income will somehow be split into different up to 3 parts. So if somehow they will be split into 1 part, then part 2 and part 3 will simply be 0. So that means these 2 branches will not be executed. In the case where the income will be split into 2 parts, that means only these 2 branches will be executed. And in the case where it's actually split into 3 parts, that means all the if branches will be executed. Now, one exercise for you that's very important for you to know, it wouldn't work if we change to this. Rather than saying if, and if, we're now actually saying if, and else if. So you must know why this alternative is actually wrong. It would be an error if you actually do this. Why? I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Please make sure you know the answer. Otherwise, you should really come to me for help. Okay? You are really expected to know why. In this case, you have to put 3 independent if statements rather than having 1 single if statement with 2 else ifs. You must know this. Okay? So once we are done with this, so this again, starting from line 85, so this block of code is actually shared and common to both branches for status equals 2 and for status equal 1, and also common to all the branches we have here. But now how should we do the rest? So now we're going to say, so now for each of the branches, we don't have to worry about the tax amount anymore, because tax will, oh, there's one more thing I need to do, I forgot. Okay, so now the calculation of the tax will be now just very simple. So we'd say tax is simply equal to part 1 plus part 2 plus part 3. Okay, so this means that we would expect the previous branches to properly set up the part 1, part 2, and part 3 accordingly, properly. In the case where the income is only split into 1 part, then part 1 will be positive, whereas part 2 and part 3 will simply remain 0, like the default values that we saw. Okay, similarly, let's say if somehow the income is split into 2 parts, then this part 1 and part 2 will be non-negative. Then part 3 will be 0. So you can see in the case where the parts are 0, they simply have no effects to the addition. So this will actually work for all the possible income value. Again, you should really convince yourself that you understand about this logic here. Okay, so now for all the 6 branches we have here, we do not have to worry about how the tax is actually calculated. We only have to worry about the breakdown for each part. So here we should say part 1. Okay, in this case, because we simply have income less than or equal to the first cutoff point. So part 1 will simply be the income times that. Okay, you don't need the parentheses here, but and put some space here. Okay, so that will be part 1 for this case here. And now we do the same. So now we have part 2. So for the case where the income exceeds the first cutoff point, then we have to calculate part 1, and we have to calculate part 2 here. So also you don't need the parentheses here. And put some space around the multiply symbol here. And we don't have to worry about the tax, because somehow this part here is already handled by this line over here, right? So we are trying to remove the duplicates. We just did it once. You can get rid of this. You can get rid of all these, because all of these have been already handled by the common part over here. So you can see the common part has to be defined only once, so which can essentially help you eliminate all the duplicates in your code. Okay, we are getting there. So now we're going to calculate for part 1 for this case. Let me just fix that a little bit. So we also have that. Part 1, part 2, and part 3. And once we have done the 3 parts, we can get rid of all the print statements and the tax calculation, because they are already done by the common part. Okay. Similarly, I'm going to copy this code here. It's going to be exactly the same. So now part 1 would be just the income because it's below the first cutoff point. Get rid of all those. And we have part 2. So we have part 1. So here we have part 1 here. That'll be a full amount before the first cutoff point. And now we have part 2. Don't need a parenthesis here. Okay, that's part 1 and part 2. And don't worry about the apex. It's being handled. You'll be handled later. Okay, get rid of that. And finally, we reach the last branch here. So let's just do that properly. Okay, just remember you don't have to put unnecessary parentheses here because it's a simple expression here, so you don't need it. Okay, so now we have the calculation for all the 3 parts. Okay, you should put a space around the assignment as well. So now we have part 1, part 2, and part 3, so we don't need this either. So now you can see now the code structure is actually much simpler. You can see that now overall. Let's go over that again. So once we get the input status from the user, we're going to check to see if the status is larger than 2. If it is not, then we check to see if it is less than 1. If it is not, then we have an else. And by doing some logic here, we know that because this is not satisfied and this is not satisfied, so we know that status has to be either 1 or 2. That is why under this else branch here, we have some nested if. And for that if statement here, we say either status equals 1 or else. And else part really means status equals 2. Okay, so now outside of this if and else statement here, so we are actually directly under else part. So this is the declarations that will be shared by both branches here, the if branch and the else branch. They will be shared. You can see we only have to write the print statements to prompt for their income just once rather than having twice as before. Okay, and then now for each branch over there, we're only going to worry about how part 1 or part 1 and part 2 or part 1 and part 2 and part 3 are calculated. So this, for example, this case is where the income will only be split into 2 parts. So here we don't have to worry about part 3. In this case, part 3 will simply do nothing to part 3, which means it will stay in its default value as 0. That is why even if we add part 1, part 2, and part 3 in the later common code, and part 3 really has no effects to the eventual text amount, so that will work. Okay, so again, so this is the common code that we put before we check the branches, and here is the common code that we put after we check the branches, after we have figured out for each part 1, part 2, and part 3. So this line here, we just put it once. Text equals all the 3 parts added up together. Some parts might be 0, but that's okay. If they are 0, they have no effects to the addition. And then we're going to output to the user to say how much you have to pay. And again, we only have one single such print statement rather than having that in each of the branches. And we say calculation is based on the scheme of. Now the scheme can be either when status equal to 1, in which case we say single filing. Otherwise, the status is equal to 2, then we say married filing. And finally, we are going to do the following. We're going to say, well, we're going to check each part one by one. If part 1 is greater than 0, then that should be a breakdown. We should print out the breakdown. Similarly, if part 2 is actually larger than 0, then we should print out the breakdown for part 2, and similarly for part 3. And as an exercise for you, you must know why, if I simply add, rather than 3 independent if statements here, I have a single if statement with else if, else if. So this version here is wrong. That one will have wrong behavior for your output. You have to know exactly why. Okay, I'll leave that as an exercise for you. If you need help, come to my office hour. Okay, so now that's basically it. So I will make these 2 files available to you. So please try to study the original version, which is somehow correct. It produced the correct output. However, the code structure actually somehow smells because it got lots of repetition of the code, which will make your code very hard to maintain. However, the other version I created is actually also produced the right output, but it actually is much cleaner now. So the internal structure has somehow been cleaned up. So that one is actually much more maintainable. So this will be a very good case study for you to practice yourself. Okay, so that'll be it for this tutorial. Stay watching.